The Galactic Council's chambers shimmered with the crystalline glow of floating orbs that emitted soft, iridescent light. Delegates from every corner of the known galaxy filled the vast hall, their myriad forms reflecting the diversity of species under the Council's banner. Seated at the central podium, High Chancellor Zoran tapped his long, spindly fingers on the crystalline table. His violet skin glistened with irritation as he addressed the topic of humanity for what felt like the 100th time that cycle. Humans rely on primitive weapons, solid projectiles, and chemical explosives. They are outclassed by our energy shields and plasma-based systems. Their refusal to surrender is simply irrational, Zoran declared. His words met with murmurs of agreement. A sharp voice interrupted the hum of consensus. And yet, they hold the line against your mighty fleets, said Ambassador Ethan Hayes, the sole human present. His voice was calm, but carried an undeniable weight. You underestimate what our so-called primitive weapons can do. A scoffing laugh echoed from the corner. Commander Tavrix, the imposing delegate from the Threxian Empire, leaned forward. Are we to believe that your ground artillery, cannons, and rockets pose a threat to fleets that dominate entire star systems? Humans are nothing more than relics clinging to outdated tools. Your resistance is futile. Ethan smirked faintly. Relics, you say? I suggest you watch the next engagement closely. His gaze swept over the room. Humans don't fight wars the way you do. We've spent centuries perfecting the art of overwhelming force. The chamber erupted in laughter, but Ethan stood unshaken, his quiet confidence unnerving a few who stopped to wonder if the human might actually be onto something. Far away, on the barren plains of Krostos 4, human soldiers worked diligently to position their MLRS units. The sleek vehicles bore racks of rockets, their mechanical frames poised for war. One operator double-checked coordinates, while another ran diagnostics on targeting systems. The commander overseeing the operation spoke into his radio. Coordinates confirmed. Load the racks. Dozens of human MLRS launchers tilted their barrels skyward, their operators bracing for the coming storm. The calm before the storm held an almost reverent silence. Somewhere among the distant mountains, the alien forces prepared for an easy victory, blissfully unaware of the firestorm about to engulf them. The commander lowered his binoculars and gave a simple order: fire. The Galactic Council's chambers were abuzz with the self-assured proclamations of its most powerful members. Seated near the center of the Council's vast, crescent-shaped table, Commander Tavrix of the Threxian Empire exuded a predatory confidence. His armor glinted beneath the chamber's light, a ceremonial embellishment meant to project strength. Our fleets have crushed entire civilizations more advanced than humanity, Tavrix began, his voice a low growl that carried across the hall. Their armies will crumble under the first wave of our assault. Their reliance on outdated projectiles is laughable. The other delegates murmured their approval. Their species' unique features, swaying antennae, glowing eyes, or scaled necks, reflecting a collective derision for Earth's defenders. Tavrix smirked, watching the human representative, Ethan Hayes, seated at the far end of a chamber. Hayes was the only human present, a stark contrast to the alien species that filled the hall with their vibrant appearances. Clad in a plain navy suit, he lacked the ostentation of the others, yet his unflinching posture suggested the weight of an unspoken truth. "You're mistaking simplicity for weakness," Hayes said, his voice even and calm. "Humans have never relied on technology alone. We rely on strategy, adaptability, and firepower designed to overwhelm, not dazzle." Tavrix chuckled and gestured with his clawed hand, as if dismissing the comment. Strategy? Firepower? What firepower can compare to fleets capable of scorching planets to ash in hours? No, Ambassador Hayes, your weapons are relics, and humanity's defiance is a futile charade. Hayes held Tavrix's gaze for a moment longer before leaning forward slightly, placing his palms on the table. Defiance, you say? Tell that to your ground troops when they're pulling survivors from craters after a rain of steel. The chamber grew silent, if only for a moment, before Tavrix barked a laugh, echoed by the other delegates. Meanwhile, across the galaxy on the planet Crostos 4, alien forces advanced with precision. The Threxian army, spearheading the invasion of this contested human colony, moved in well-drilled formations. Infantry and heavy-powered exosuits flanked hulking plasma tanks, their shields shimmering as they absorbed stray kinetic fire. Overhead, agile war drones patrolled the skies, scanning for threats. Colonel Vrennick, a seasoned Threxian officer, watched the scene unfold from his command vehicle. His green eyes, slit-pupilled and piercing, studied a holographic map of the battlefield. The humans retreat further with each skirmish, he observed, his tone clipped. Pathetic. They don't even fight directly, just deploy weak potshots from their hidden positions before running. One of his subordinates, a lanky scout with pale scales, chimed in. They fear us, Colonel. Resistance is limited to token strikes. It's only a matter of time before their front lines collapse. Vrennick nodded approvingly. It was unfolding as expected. Every report reinforced the perception that humanity's artillery, a patchwork of ancient systems incapable of breaking their defenses, was no match for Threxian shields. Keep pressure on them. If they think hiding will save them, we'll root them out like vermin, Vrennick said, dismissing his scout with a sharp wave. Across the plains, human forces worked methodically. Behind camouflage netting and reinforced embankments, multiple MLRS, multiple launch rocket system, units remained in readiness. These vehicles appeared humble, rugged military trucks outfitted with massive launch racks, but their lethal capacity was unmatched. In the shadow of a rocky hill, Captain Amelia Brooks, a steadfast officer in Earth's Defense Forces, coordinated with her team. Targeting data uploaded, her artillery officer said, handing her a tactical tablet. Brooks studied the map briefly, her face impassive. Despite alien advances, she seemed unworried, almost serene. Good, she said. They're pressing into position, overconfident as always. Behind her, soldiers rushed to prepare the vehicles. Heavy racks pivoted with mechanical precision, aimed towards the distant horizon. Beside each launcher, a crew worked quickly to load the rockets, deadly instruments of destruction that would soon tear through the alien army. Her comms crackled, a transmission from Central Command filtering in. All MLRS units report readiness within 5 minutes. Enemy advancement confirmed. Initiate Phase 1 on my mark. Brooks smirked slightly. Phase 1? This planet only needs one phase. Colonel Vrennick monitored his advancing forces with satisfaction. Around him, infantry marched in tight formations while mechanized divisions prepared to strike decisive blows. Even the skies above seemed serene, his aerial patrols spotting nothing unusual. Forward units will breach their main defensive line within 20 minutes, one officer reported. Excellent, Vrennick said, folding his clawed hands behind his back. His next thought was interrupted by a distant, faint sound, low and guttural, almost like a rumble of thunder on the horizon. The officer frowned. Seismic activity? I didn't see anything on planetary scans. No. Vrennick cut him off sharply, his reptilian features twitching as he peered out towards the horizon. The sound grew louder, more persistent, taking on a rhythm that made his ears twitch. Over the ridge, far in the distance, dozens of plumes of smoke rose into the sky as human MLRS systems erupted into action. Their salvos sliced through the alien silence, carrying a rain of destruction. From that first salvo, the planet seemed to groan, announcing a new, deadly chapter in the war. And for the first time in his career, Colonel Vrennick froze. not out of indecision, but because, for the first time, the enemy wasn't running. The simplicity humans were mocked for had now revealed its brutal purpose. The roar of the MLRS systems shattered the stillness across those four. Rockets streaked across the twilight sky, leaving long trails of smoke that burned against the amber glow of the alien sun. Their arcs were precise, deadly, and inevitable, a salvo crafted to overwhelm even the most robust defenses. Colonel Vrennick stared in stunned silence as the barrage descended on his forces. For a fleeting moment, he dismissed the rockets as minor threats. His confidence, born of countless victorious campaigns, whispered that no primitive projectile could harm their state-of-the-art defenses. The first impacts, however, silenced such notions. The ground trembled under the explosive fury as the MLRS warhead struck with pinpoint accuracy, ripping through the Threxian ranks. Shields that had held against plasma and laser fire for decades flickered, overloaded by the kinetic onslaught. A single direct hit would collapse the shields entirely, leaving exposed infantry and armored columns to be annihilated. "Shields down on sectors 12 through 15, shouted a Threxian officer, his claws trembling as he monitored the incoming telemetry. "We can't sustain this." "What do you mean, we can't sustain this?" "Redirect power. Reinforce the—" Vrennick's barked order was interrupted by the ear-splitting explosion of another rocket landing less than 50 meters from the command vehicle. The shock waves slammed into them, sending holographic displays flickering and scattering soldiers into disarray. For the first time in years, the commander felt fear claw its way into his chest. At the human command post, Captain Amelia Brooks observed the unfolding devastation with professional detachment. Seated at a rugged console surrounded by communications officers, she leaned forward, studying live drone feeds of the battlefield. Each screen displayed chaos. Alien tanks erupted into fireballs as the rockets struck their weakest points, between shield generators and armor plating. Infantry, too slow to scatter, were vaporized or sent flying from the force of near misses. Plasma war drones spiraled from the skies, engines shredded by shrapnel that tore through their reinforced shells. Direct hits on priority targets, her artillery officer reported, unable to hide his grin. Damage assessments coming in, multiple command units eliminated. The lines destabilizing. "Good," Brooks replied, her tone calm but resolute. "Keep the pressure up. Target their logistics next. Make sure they have nothing left to retreat with." She activated her comlink, broadcasting to all units. Phase 2 begins now. Full saturation across all fallback positions. Back on the battlefield, Colonel Vrennick scrambled for control. Around him, the Threxian war machine seemed to falter. Soldiers who had marched with cold efficiency only minutes ago were now panicking, their once unstoppable advance reduced to a desperate fight for survival. "Deploy countermeasures," he shouted. "Jam their targeting systems, launch interceptors." His second-in-command, a younger officer with quaking knees, responded grimly, "Interceptors are too slow against this type of barrage. We weren't prepared for saturation at this scale." Prepared or not, the Threxians scrambled to respond. War drones were pulled from offensive duties to intercept incoming rockets, their beams slicing through the sky. For every projectile they destroyed, 3 more slipped through. The air seemed alive with destruction, a symphony of fire and metal that punished every misstep. An officer stepped forward. "Colonel, they're launch points. They're shielded by the terrain. Our artillery can't target them directly." Vrennick snarled, slamming a clawed fist onto his console. "Then bring in orbital strikes." The officer hesitated. "Orbital support is focusing on neutralizing space-based reinforcements. We're on our own." "Alone." The word echoed in Vrennick's mind. A species they had mocked had somehow forced them into a position of helplessness. His scaled hands trembled with barely contained frustration. In the human artillery positions, teams worked seamlessly to maintain the onslaught. Each MLRS launcher was a hub of frenetic activity. Crews reloaded rocket racks and practice sequences, while targeting algorithms adjusted in real time to enemy movements. The operators' focus never wavered. They had trained for moments like this, knowing the stakes of failure. Launcher 6 is ready, one soldier called, snapping a fresh magazine of rockets into place. Launch when ready, another voice answered. The rack erupted into life, its projectiles soaring into the sky to join the chorus of destruction raining down upon the Threxians. Captain Brooks stood near the main targeting computer, her voice steady as she directed the operation. Shift focus to their central command cluster. If we take out their leaders, the rest will scatter. Her artillery officer smirked. Doesn't look like they're holding together much as it is. Don't underestimate them, Brooks said sharply. Cornered predators are the most dangerous. Maintain fire until there's nothing left to corner. Colonel Vrenick finally ordered a retreat. Pull back. Regroup at fallback point 3, he barked into his comms. But the order came too late. The retreating forces found their path blocked by more incoming salvos. Human firepower wasn't content with stopping them. It aimed to annihilate them. Alien tanks, their towering forms once symbols of invincibility, were caught in choke points and obliterated. Fleeing infantry found no refuge as rockets carved craters across open terrain. Even the command vehicle that carried Vrenick rattled from shockwaves. The ground beneath it scorched and unstable. By now, the Threxian forces weren't retreating, they were routing. Soldiers dropped their weapons and fled, some abandoning their armor entirely to move faster. One of Vrenick's officers shouted, "We need evac. If we stay here any longer, we'll—" The officer's words were drowned out by another explosion, this one dangerously close. The blast sent the vehicle skidding, its comm array snapping like a twig. Vrenick could do nothing but watch in stunned silence as the battlefield was consumed by chaos. A once proud invasion force, reduced to burning wreckage and scattering survivors. Back at the human command center, Captain Brooks watched her drones transmit the final stages of the battle. Fleeing Threxians disappeared into a rising curtain of dust and fire. Her lips thinned in satisfaction, though she showed no outward celebration. "This sector's done," she said to her comm team. "Begin recon operations. Ensure no pockets of resistance remain, and send a report to command. They'll want to see what outdated artillery just did to a galactic invasion force." "Roger that, Captain," a comms officer replied, already preparing the data. Brooks gave the battlefield one last look before turning away. "And let command know Phase 3 is greenlit. Time to make them regret ever coming here." As the smoke settled over Krostos 4, humanity's so-called primitive weapons had rewritten the rules of war. The Threxian retreat from Krostos 4 was less of an organized withdrawal and more of a chaotic flight. Broken tanks and shattered infantry littered the barren plains, silent testaments to the devastating accuracy of human artillery. Thick smoke clung to the battlefield like a funeral shroud, marking the end of what was supposed to be a decisive Threxian victory. For the humans, this wasn't just a defense, it was doctrine. A core tenet of Earth's military philosophy rang clear. When forced into war, humanity responded with relentless, overwhelming force. The Threxians learned that too late. Colonel Vrenick limped into the makeshift command bunker, his scales blackened with soot and his posture hunched under the weight of defeat. The emergency site was little more than a hastily converted rock formation shielded by collapsing energy barriers. The battered remains of his staff huddled around portable consoles, their faces strained and hollow. "We've lost Krostos 4, Vrenick growled, his voice a mixture of anger and humiliation. "Transmit the message to High Command. Tell them we're regrouping, but warn them. This is no ordinary species. They have evolved for war. A junior officer, nervously tapping on a comm link, hesitated. Sir, should we also recommend a ceasefire? Perhaps the Council can negotiate in. Vrennick's claws slammed into the console, shattering the screen. The Council had their chance for diplomacy, he roared, his voice echoing in the cramped bunker. They dismissed the humans as weak, as irrelevant. Now they'll suffer the consequences of that arrogance. But first, we need to retreat and reinforce our borders. The humans will not stop here. As if on cue, distant booms reverberated through the bunker walls. The humans' MLRS systems had extended their range, pursuing the retreating forces relentlessly. Even as Vrennick tried to regroup, the next wave of rockets arced across the sky, probing further into Threxian territory. Captain Brooks surveyed the battlefield from a ridge. She had moved forward with her advanced command team once resistance crumbled, but her stance remained calculated, professional. Around her, drones buzzed, sending real-time feeds to orbiting ships and base commanders. Human ground forces moved methodically, clearing out Threxian stragglers and securing high-value targets. Push harder, Brooks commanded, addressing her field officers through the comlink. Their line is breaking, but until it's completely shattered, we can't afford to slow down. No half measures. We push them all the way back to their supply chains. An intelligence officer approached, his expression grim but determined. The drones have pinpointed their fallback supply caches, Captain. If we strike now, we can cripple their capacity to regroup for weeks. Brooks nodded. Do it. Task the MLRS units with targeting those locations. Ground forces will move to sweep and secure. What about survivors? The officer asked. Brooks's gaze remained fixed on the smoldering horizon. Eliminate combatants. Non-combatants get medical care and transport to our holding facilities. Show them that humanity doesn't just break armies. It redefines war. Her cold efficiency wasn't cruelty. It was necessity. She had studied the galaxy's history of warfare and knew what hesitation cost. In this new era, where Earth's strength was continually mocked, half measures meant extinction. High above, the orbital command vessel Resolute monitored the planet's surface. Its captain, a grizzled veteran named Elias Hart, watched the operation unfold with grim satisfaction. What's the Threxian response? Hart asked, addressing his tactical officer. They're still falling back, sir, but initial recon suggests they're rallying fleets from neighboring sectors. They know they've underestimated us and are calling for reinforcements. Hart leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Typical. They'll try to overwhelm us with numbers again. That's their way, predictable, rigid. Get command on the line. Tell them Krostos is secure, but we need more assets if we're going to maintain pressure across multiple fronts. The tactical officer hesitated. With respect, sir, if they bring more fleets, can we handle that? Hart's sharp gaze pinned the officer in place. The Threxians are learning what the rest of the galaxy will soon understand. Earth doesn't start wars, but we damn well finish them. Our artillery, our soldiers, they're not the limits of our strength. They're just the beginning. As night fell on Krostos 4, the human forces consolidated their hold. Engineers established forward bases, fortified with automated defenses and ammunition reserves. Troops, weary but resolute, held their positions, knowing full well the Threxians weren't likely to give up so easily. In one of the bases, a private named Jacob Warren cleaned his rifle as the distant rumble of artillery fire persisted. Think they'll come back? Another soldier asked, leaning against a supply crate. Warren smirked. If they do, they'll regret it even more. Command doesn't seem like the type to let them regroup. The second soldier nodded, the corner of his mouth lifting in a half-smile. I used to wonder if all that training, all that prep for planetary warfare, was overkill. Thought we'd never actually need to fight like this. Well, Warren said, sliding around into his weapon, guess the galaxy learned humans aren't just good at surviving. We're good at winning. At the remains of a distant Threxian outpost, a wounded survivor hobbled toward a command console, desperate to signal for help. Burn marks covered his scales, and the acrid stench of burnt machinery filled the air around him. He activated the console with trembling hands, broadcasting a distress call. "This is Outpost Gamma 12, his voice rasped, requesting immediate assistance. The humans, they don't stop. Their artillery isn't like anything we've faced before. It's relentless." As he finished, another distant explosion sent debris scattering, and the comm station went silent. Brooks watched the final drone feed flicker as the last Threxian outpost was reduced to rubble. She activated her comm link. Mission success. Krostos 4 is under full human control. Begin preparations for planetary stabilization and long-term supply lines. Another officer approached, his voice low but inquisitive. "Captain, what do we do if the Threxians come back? Or if their council sends reinforcements?" Brooks glanced at him, her tone firm and resolute. "Then we remind them why Earth's doctrine is simple. Never escalate with humans. You might not live to see the second warning." As her words hung in the air, the embers across those 4 glowed brighter, a testament to the power of humanity's will to survive and its newfound dominance in a galaxy that had underestimated it for the last time. With their enemies scattered and their tactics proven devastating, humanity's rise was no longer a question of if, but when. General Adrian Colburn stood on a ridge overlooking the scorched battlefield of Krostos 4. The smog of war hung in the air, intermingling with the dying light of the setting sun. Below him, teams of human engineers and soldiers methodically cleared debris and salvaged what remained. Craters littered the land, each one a mark of human resolve carved into the soil. Colburn's expression was unreadable, but his voice carried the weight of hard-earned victory. "Make no mistake," he said to his gathered officers. "This isn't just a win for Earth. It's a message. Let the galaxy spread the word. Let them tell their tales of fire raining down and of fortresses crumbling. They'll think twice before dismissing our firepower again." Behind him, the rhythmic rumble of engines heralded the departure of the MLRS units. Their long silhouettes moved in disciplined formation, the setting sun casting golden light on their steel frames. Each machine was a testament to humanity's doctrine: precision, relentlessness, and overwhelming power. One officer, standing nearby, broke the silence. "Do you think they'll retaliate, sir?" Colburn turned to him, his gaze steady and calm. "If they're wise, they won't. And if they do," he gestured to the departing MLRS units, their tracks etched into the soil like battle scars. "We'll be ready." As the final vehicles rolled over the horizon, the sun dipped lower, bathing the battlefield in a warm, defiant glow. Humanity's presence had been cemented in the galaxy, a force no one could afford to underestimate.